The fist connected before anyone saw it coming. One moment, Private Sarah Jensen stood on the combat training mat, hands raised in defensive posture, sweat cutting, lines through the Arizona dust on her face. The next Sergeant First Class Wade Brennan's knuckles crashed into her jaw with the full rotational force of 220 pounds of muscle memory from 3 decades of close quarters combat training. Not a controlled demonstration strike, not a training tap. A real punch, the kind designed to break bones and end fights. Jensen's head snapped sideways. Blood exploded from her split lip, bright red drops scattering across the pale dirt like paint on canvas. Her legs went liquid. She dropped hard shoulder blades, hitting the ground with a sound like a sack of grain thrown from a truck bed. 37 recruits, standing in formation around the mat, went absolutely silent. The kind of silence that happens when something fundamentally wrong occurs and everyone's brain is still trying to process what their eyes just witnessed. Brennan stood over her chest, heaving that thick vein in his neck, pulsing like a trapped snake, waiting for her to cry, to beg to curl into a ball, like every other recruit did when the butcher decided it was their turn to break. His boots were 6 inches from her face. She could smell the leather polish, see the microscopic cracks in the black surface. But Private Sarah Jensen didn't cry. She lay there for exactly 3 seconds, her eyes clear, almost calculating, while a sensor no bigger than a grain of rice surgically implanted beneath the skin near her left rib cage detected the sudden spike in her cortisol levels, the rapid elevation of her heart rate, the specific biomarkers that indicated extreme physical trauma. That tiny piece of technology, invisible to everyone on that scorching parade deck, began transmitting a signal. Not a normal emergency alert, an Omega Red priority code. The kind of signal that bypassed every level of military bureaucracy and lit up screens in places most soldiers didn't know existed. What Sergeant Brennan didn't know, what nobody standing on that training ground knew, was that he hadn't just punched a farm girl from Ohio who couldn't quite hack infantry training. He just triggered a protocol reserved for threats to national security assets. He thought he was teaching a lesson in humility. He was actually 7 minutes away from having his entire 23-year career dissected, burned, and buried by people who wore badges instead of uniforms because their authority superseded the chain of command. But to understand why Wade Brennan threw that punch, why he put everything behind it, you have to rewind the clock. You have to go back 10 weeks. Back to June 15th, when a woman who wasn't Sarah Jensen walked into Fort Galloway for the first time, carrying a lie that would eventually bring down not just one sergeant, but an entire network of corruption that had been rotting the base from the inside for years. 10 weeks earlier, the Pentagon smelled like floor wax and filtered air, like every important decision in modern warfare got made in buildings where windows didn't open and sunlight had to ask permission to enter. Major Elena Vance sat in a conference room on the 3rd sublevel, the kind of room that didn't appear on any official floor plan, watching a slideshow that was making her stomach turn. 43 faces, all young, all discharged from Fort Galloway Infantry Training Center in the past 18 months. Medical discharges, psychological discharges, administrative separations. The official paperwork was clean, professional, stamped with the appropriate signatures from military doctors and commanding officers. But when you laid all 43 cases side by side, when you looked at the pattern, instead of the individual pixels, you saw something else entirely. You saw teeth marks, predator behavior, 340% above the national average for training discharges, the DIA director said. He was a compact man in his late 50s named Harrison, with steel gray hair, cut military short, and eyes that had stopped being impressed by anything around the time the Berlin Wall fell. And that's just the ones who made it into the official statistics. We estimate another dozen washed out without generating paperwork, just disappeared back to civilian life. Vance studied the faces. Boys, really, 19, 20 years old, the average age of an infantry trainee. Some looked shell-shocked in their ID photos like they'd already seen combat before they ever touched a rifle. Others had that 1,000-yard stare that usually took a deployment to develop. "What's the common denominator?" she asked. Harrison clicked to the next slide. One face filled the screen now. Older, harder, with a jaw like a cinder block, and eyes that looked through you instead of at you. Sergeant First Class Wade Brennan, Desert Storm veteran, Silver Star recipient, 23 years of service. He's been the senior drill instructor at Fort Galloway for the past 18 months. Every single one of these discharges came from his training cycles. Vance leaned forward. And nobody's done anything. The base commander is a yes man named Colonel Winters. He's 6 months from retirement, doesn't want waves. The few complaints that made it up the chain got buried with character assessments that painted the recruits as weak, unsuitable for service. Brennan's got a reputation. Old Army, hard but fair. His graduation numbers are actually good, the ones who make it through. Harrison paused. But we're not here about training violations, Major. The next slide showed a map of Afghanistan, specifically a valley in Kunar province. Red X marks indicated positions, 4 of them. August 12, 4 months ago, a National Guard logistics convoy took a wrong turn in a supposedly secure area. Taliban ambush. All 4 soldiers killed before the QRF could respond. The intel said that route was safe. Someone told the Taliban exactly where that convoy would be and when. Vance's throat went tight. You think Brennan leaked it? We know he's been in contact with members of the Watchmen of Liberty, a domestic extremist group with white nationalist ties. Phone records, encrypted messaging apps, the works. We've been monitoring him for 6 months. But we can't prove the Afghanistan leak came from him. Not yet. Not with enough evidence to prosecute. Harrison clicked again. A schematic of Fort Galloway appeared, hundreds of buildings, training ranges, spreading across the Arizona high desert. We need someone inside. Someone who can document the abuse, yes, but more importantly, someone who can get close enough to his computer systems, his communications, to find the evidence that connects him to those 4 dead soldiers. You want me to go undercover? Vance kept her voice flat, professional, gave away nothing. You're a strategic intelligence analyst. You've never done field work. You don't have the operator smell that Brennan would detect from a mile away. You're perfect precisely because you're not trained for this. Harrison slid a folder across the table. Sarah Jensen, farm girl from rural Ohio, 1 year of community college, dropped out to help with the family farm, decided to enlist because she needed purpose. Unremarkable academics, decent physical fitness, no red flags. You'll be boring, invisible. Exactly the kind of recruit who gets overlooked. Vance opened the folder. The woman staring back at her from the ID photo looked like a different person. Plain Jane features brown hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, eyes that suggested someone who had spent more time with livestock than people. The entire backstory was there. Parents, schooling, employment history, even a manufactured social media presence going back 5 years. The DIA had built a human being out of whole cloth. What's the timeline? She asked. 12 weeks. That's a full infantry training cycle. You document everything. We'll have a handler on base monitoring you through an implanted biosensor. The moment you're in real danger, we extract you. Harrison's expression didn't change, but his voice dropped half an octave. But Major, I need you to understand something. This isn't just about catching one abusive drill sergeant. 4 American soldiers are dead because someone sold them out. If Brennan's working with domestic terrorists, if there are others, we need to know before more people die. Vance looked at the faces again. 43 discharged recruits. 4 dead soldiers. She thought about her younger sister Emma, 22 years old, discharged from basic training in 2018, after a drill instructor systematically destroyed her self-confidence over 10 weeks. Emma, who now worked night shifts at a gas station outside Columbus, who drank too much, who couldn't hold down relationships because the uniform had broken something essential inside her before she ever got the chance to serve. When do I ship out? Vance asked. Harrison smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. You're already late for in-processing. Fort Galloway sprawled across 15,000 acres of high desert scrubland where the temperature hit 110 degrees by mid-afternoon, and the only shade came from buildings painted the same beige as the landscape. The civilian bus dropped 38 recruits at the main gate on a Tuesday morning in mid-June, and from the moment their boots hit the pavement, they belonged to the Army. The in-processing was designed to strip away civilian identity, haircuts that left skulls visible, uniforms that fit like cardboard boxes, shouted instructions from processing sergeants who didn't care about names, only about moving bodies through the pipeline fast enough to meet quotas. Sarah Jensen, who was really Major Elena Vance, let herself be swept along in the current, kept her eyes down, her mouth shut, her movements just clumsy enough to seem authentic. The barracks smelled like industrial cleaner and anxiety. 60 bunks in one long room, metal frames with thin mattresses that had molded themselves to the shape of thousands of previous bodies. Vance took a middle bunk not too close to the drill sergeant's office, not so far back that she'd draw attention. Within 30 minutes, she had her gear stowed, her bunk made to the loose approximation of standard that suggested someone who'd tried to follow the diagram but didn't quite understand the physics of hospital corners. The recruit in the next bunk was unpacking with the kind of careful precision that spoke to farm work. 18, maybe 19, with blonde hair buzzed down to stubble, and the kind of hands that knew manual labor. She caught Vance watching and offered a shy smile. "Rachel Sullivan," she said. "Montana. You, Sarah Jensen, Ohio." The lie came smooth, practiced 100 times in front of mirrors, until Elena Vance could disappear completely, and this other person could step forward. "Farm girl, too. Ranch, cattle mostly, you, corn and soybeans, some livestock." Vance had memorized the details. 40 acres outside a town called Pemberville, population 800. She could describe the layout, the equipment, the neighbors, everything. First time away from home, Rachel nodded and something vulnerable flickered across her face, the kind of expression that made Vance's chest tighten because she recognized it. The look of someone running from something, hoping the uniform would provide protection from a civilian life that had stopped being safe. Before she could respond, a voice like a chainsaw cutting sheet metal ripped through the barracks. "On your feet!" 3 drill sergeants entered in a wedge formation. The one in front was average height, but built like a fire hydrant, all compressed muscle and contained violence. His uniform was so perfectly pressed, it looked like it would crack if he bent too far. Campaign ribbons covered his left breast, a silver star, prominent among them. His face was weathered leather eyes the color of old ice, jaw set in a permanent clench. Sergeant First Class Wade Brennan. Vance had studied his file until she could recite it in her sleep. Born 1907, enlisted 1994, deployed Desert Storm at 17 years old during the final weeks. Panama before that. Grenada. Every conflict where America had sent infantry to do the bleeding. Married once, divorced. One son Michael killed in Fallujah 2004. No remarriage. No real relationships documented. Just 23 years of making soldiers, breaking the ones who didn't measure up, and somehow never quite crossing the line far enough to get punished for it. He walked down the center aisle between bunks, each step deliberate boots hitting the floor like hammers. The other 2 drill sergeants flanked him, younger men with eyes that tracked movement like gun turrets. When Brennan reached the center of the barracks, he stopped, rotated slowly, taking in every face. "Listen up, because I'm only saying this once," he said. The voice matched the face ground down by years of screaming into wind and dust. "I am Sergeant First Class Brennan. For the next 12 weeks I own you. Your body belongs to me. Your time belongs to me. Your sleep, your meals, your thoughts, all mine. You signed a contract that gave me permission to turn you from soft civilian garbage into something that might, if we're lucky, survive 5 minutes in actual combat." He paused, letting the words settle like fallout. "Most of you won't make it. You'll quit. You'll get injured. You'll wash out because you realize you bit off more than your soft little mouths can chew. That's fine. Better you fail here than get real soldiers killed downrange. But for those of you who do make it, you'll walk out of here with something you've never had before. Standards, discipline, the knowledge that you can push through pain that would make your civilian selves curl up and die." Brennan started walking again, slower now, studying faces. He stopped in front of a kid who looked like he was trying very hard not to cry. "You scared?" "No, Sergeant." The kid's voice cracked. "You should be." Brennan moved on, stopped at a heavy-set recruit whose uniform strained at the buttons. "You look soft. You going to quit on me?" "No, Sergeant." "We'll see." Then he was standing in front of Vance. She kept her eyes forward, not meeting his gaze the way the in-processing sergeants had instructed. But she could feel him looking at her. Not a glance, a study, like he was performing some kind of internal assessment, running calculations. "Farm girl," he said. It wasn't a question. "Yes, Sergeant." Keep the voice neutral. Small-town Ohio accent, slight uptick at the ends of sentences. Not confident, not weak, invisible. "Let me see your hands." Vance held them out, palms up. She'd spent 2 weeks working construction before shipping out building calluses, getting dirt under her nails that wouldn't wash out completely. But Brennan took her right hand, turned it over, studied the palm with the intensity of someone reading a medical chart. Soft, he said. You got soft hands for someone who claims they work a farm. The biosensor under her ribs registered a spike in her heart rate. 14 other people in the room, and Brennan had gone straight to the one person who was lying. Coincidence, instinct. Or had he already been briefed somehow that someone unusual was in his platoon? Winter's been slow, Sergeant, Vance said. Haven't had much field work lately. Brennan held her gaze for 3 seconds longer than necessary, then released her hand, moved on. We'll fix that. 12 weeks from now, your hands will look like they've been through a war, if you last that long. He finished his circuit, returned to the center of the barracks. First formation is at 0500 hours. That's 5 in the morning for those of you who can't tell military time. You will be outside in uniform, boots, laced, ready to begin the process of becoming soldiers. Anyone who's late will regret existing. Dismissed. The drill sergeants filed out. The moment the door closed, the barracks erupted in nervous chatter. Recruits introducing themselves, comparing backgrounds, trying to build alliances that might help them survive what was coming. Rachel leaned toward Vance. He's intense. Yeah. Vance lay back on her bunk, staring at the ceiling. Through the thin fabric of her uniform, she could feel the biosensor. Right now, 3 miles away in the Tactical Operations Center, a DIA officer named Captain Lucas Hartwell was monitoring her vital signs, making sure the implant was functioning correctly. By tomorrow, they'd establish a pattern. Normal heart rate, normal stress responses. Any deviation from that baseline would trigger alerts. If Brennan hurt her badly enough, if the danger became acute, Hartwell would activate the extraction protocol. But for now, she was Private Sarah Jensen, farm girl from Ohio. Unremarkable, forgettable, invisible. Exactly the way she needed to be. The first week was designed to break bodies and spirits simultaneously. 0500 hours formation every morning before the sun turned the Arizona desert into a convection oven. Physical training until recruits vomited, then more physical training after they finished vomiting. Classroom instruction on military law, customs, and courtesies, the Uniform Code of Military Justice. Drill and ceremony until every movement became muscle memory, until 38 individuals moved like a single organism. And through it all, Brennan watched. He had a gift for identifying weakness. Not just physical limitations, anyone could spot the fat kid struggling with push-ups or the skinny kid who couldn't do a pull-up to save his life. Brennan found psychological fault lines. The recruit who flinched when voices got loud got extra attention at maximum volume. The one who seemed cocky got publicly humiliated until the arrogance shattered. The religious kid who kept a small Bible in his footlocker found himself doing firewatch every night for a week, sleep deprivation breaking down his faith, one exhausted prayer at a time. Vance performed exactly average in everything, 37 out of 40 on rifle marksmanship, qualifying just barely expert level. Physical fitness test scores that hovered right at the passing threshold. Not good enough to stand out, not bad enough to attract correction. She was vanilla background noise, the kind of soldier who graduated and got sent to a logistics unit where her mediocrity would never endanger anyone. But Rachel Sullivan. Rachel drew Brennan's attention like blood drew sharks. It started small. Rachel had this tiny flinch whenever someone moved too quickly in her peripheral vision. Vance noticed it the second day. Brennan noticed it the third. And once he noticed, he started testing it, walking past her fast during formation, slamming his hand on the table during classroom instruction, watching her jump, never acknowledging it directly, never explaining why, just conditioning her to live in a state of constant tension. By the end of week 2, Rachel was sleeping maybe 3 hours a night. Vance could hear her crying softly after lights out, those suppressed sounds people make when they're trying not to let anyone know they're breaking. "You okay?" Vance whispered one night. "I'm fine. Rachel's voice was small in the dark. "Just, my dad used to move like that, fast, before he'd—" She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't have to. "Brennan's just testing you," Vance said. "Seeing if you'll quit. Don't give him the satisfaction." "I won't." But Rachel's voice had the quality of someone making a promise they weren't sure they could keep. Vance stared at the ceiling, listening to 37 other people breathing in the dark. 3 miles away, Captain Hartwell was monitoring her biosensor, making sure she stayed safe. But there was no sensor for Rachel, no extraction protocol, just a 19-year-old girl from Montana trying to escape an abusive father by joining an organization that had given her to an abusive drill sergeant. The math was simple and cruel. Document the abuse. Gather evidence. Let it continue long enough to build a prosecutable case, even if that meant watching people suffer, even if it meant becoming complicit through inaction. This was the job. Major Elena Vance understood the mission parameters. But Private Sarah Jensen, the person she was pretending to be the person Rachel thought was her friend, that person wouldn't stand by and watch someone get destroyed. The contradiction was going to be a problem. Week 4 brought weapons training and night operations, and with it, Vance's first real opportunity to gather intelligence. The rifle ranges sat at the far edge of the base, separated from the main training area by half a mile of desert scrub. During the day, the crack of M4 carbines echoed off the distant mountains like sporadic thunderstorms. At night, the ranges went dark and quiet, maintained by a skeleton crew of support personnel who had better things to do than patrol empty berms. Brennan kept his office in the drill sergeant commune, a small building adjacent to the main barracks, where the permanent party instructors handled administrative work. Vance had studied the layout during her infiltration briefing. Single-story structure, 4 offices shared computer terminal in a common area. The computers were connected to Fort Galloway's classified network. If Brennan was communicating with domestic extremist groups, if he was accessing classified information, he shouldn't have the evidence would be there. Getting to those computers required missing a bed check, crossing 300 yards of open ground, bypassing whatever minimal security existed, and returning before anyone noticed her absence. It required luck, timing, and skills that farm girls from Ohio shouldn't possess. Vance volunteered for fire guard duty. 2-hour shifts watching the barracks, making sure nobody died in a fire or did something stupid like hang themselves in a moment of despair. The 4 to 6 shift in the morning was perfect. The drill sergeants changed shift at 0500, 30 minutes of overlap, where the night crew was tired and the morning crew was still caffeinating. She waited until 0445 hours. The drill sergeant on duty, a staff sergeant named Miller, was in his office doing paperwork. Vance slipped out the side door, moved fast and low across the open ground between buildings. The pre-dawn darkness was absolute no moon, just stars scattered across the sky like buckshot. The drill sergeant compound had lights on inside, but the windows were covered with blinds. Vance circled to the back, found a window cracked open for ventilation. She paused, listening. Voices inside, 2 drill sergeants complaining about coffee quality, discussing the upcoming training schedule. No sound from the computer area. She checked the window frame. Standard military construction, metal frame with a simple latch. Vance pulled a small tool from her pocket, something she'd smuggled past in processing, hidden inside a tampon, and worked the latch free in under 10 seconds. The window swung open soundlessly, well-maintained hinges making no protest. Vance pulled herself through, dropped into a storage closet filled with training equipment. Stayed low controlled, her breathing listened. The voices were coming from the break room 40 feet away and around a corner. The computer terminal sat in the common area between her and them. She moved like smoke. Every lesson from her abbreviated intelligence training at DIA came flooding back: the way to distribute weight, how to stay in shadows, the pattern of movement that the human eye had the hardest time detecting. The computer was already on, logged into a shared administrative account. Stupid security, but typical of military installations where convenience usually won the battle against proper protocols. Vance pulled a USB drive from another hiding place, this one concealed in the seam of her belt. DIA Tech Unit had designed it to look like a simple flash drive, but the moment she inserted it into the port, it began running automated scripts that would copy every file, every email, every bit of cached data, without leaving obvious traces. The download progress bar appeared. 3 minutes estimated. 3 minutes sitting exposed in the middle of a room while 2 drill sergeants drank coffee 20 yards away. Vance's heart rate climbed. The biosensor under her ribs would be transmitting that spike, and 3 miles away, Captain Hartwell would see it. But unless she was in immediate physical danger, he wouldn't extract her. This was the mission. This was why she was here. 2 minutes remaining. One of the voices in the break room got louder, someone telling a story about a recruit who tried to smuggle contraband during in-processing. Laughter. The sound of chairs scraping. 1 minute. The progress bar crawled forward like it was moving through molasses. Vance kept her hand on the USB drive, ready to yank it out, and run if necessary. Her other hand rested on the mouse cursor, positioned to close the window instantly. Footsteps, coming toward the common area. 30 seconds. The progress bar hit 90%, 95, 98. A shadow appeared at the edge of the doorway. Vance went absolutely still, every muscle locked, not even breathing. The shadow paused. Whoever was attached to it was standing just out of sight, maybe 5 feet away, doing something she couldn't see. 100%. The USB drive gave a nearly inaudible click as the data transfer completed. Vance pulled it free, pocketed it in one smooth motion, closed the windows on screen. The shadow started moving again, stepping into the common area. Master Sergeant Garrett Wolf was 77 years old if he was a day, with the kind of face that suggested he'd been present at every major American conflict since Korea. He wore his uniform with the ease of someone who'd been putting it on for longer than most people had been alive, and his eyes, pale blue and sharp as surgical steel, tracked to Vance's position with the inevitability of a targeting system locking on. "Private," he said. His voice was surprisingly gentle, like worn leather. "You're not supposed to be here." Vance stood, slowly came to attention. Her mind raced through possible explanations, discarding each one as fast as it formed. Fire guard duty, got lost looking for the latrine. Sleepwalking, nothing worked. She'd been caught red-handed in an area she had no authorization to access, and Master Sergeant Wolf was looking at her with the kind of expression that suggested he'd already run through her possible excuses and found them all wanting. "I apologize, Master Sergeant," she said. "I'll return to the barracks." Wolf studied her for a long moment. "What's your name, Private?" "Jensen, Master Sergeant. Sarah Jensen." "Farm girl, Ohio. I remember your in-processing file." Wolf took a step closer, and Vance forced herself not to retreat. "You know what I've been doing for 47 years, Private Jensen? I've been watching recruits, thousands of them, tens of thousands. And you know what I've learned? Most people can't lie worth a damn. They think they can, but their bodies give them away. Micro-expressions, changes in breathing pattern, the way they distribute weight when they're nervous." He circled her, slowly examining her the way a jeweler examines a diamond for flaws. "But you," Wolf continued, "you're different. You stand like someone who's been at attention 1,000 times before. You move with the kind of muscle memory that takes years to develop. And your hands, despite what Sergeant Brennan said, those aren't farm girl hands. Those are hands that know how to type, how to handle delicate equipment." Vance's pulse hammered against the biosensor. The extraction protocol would be activating any second now, tactical teams spinning up preparing to pull her out before her cover was completely blown. Wolf stopped directly in front of her. "I don't know who you really are, Private. Military police maybe, Inspector General. Could be something else entirely. But I'll tell you what I do know. Sergeant Brennan is dangerous. Not dangerous like a drill sergeant, should be pushing recruits to their limits safely. Dangerous like a man who stopped caring about limits a long time ago." He leaned in slightly, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "So whatever you're here to do it fast. Because people are getting hurt. And if you're one of the good guys, you won't want that on your conscience." Then Master Sergeant Garrett Wolf stepped back, gestured toward the door. "Fire guard duty, Private Jensen. Suggest you get back to it before the morning formation catches you missing." Vance saluted, did an about-face, and walked out of the drill sergeant compound with every ounce of discipline she possessed. She didn't run, didn't look back. Just moved with purpose across the open ground as the sky started to lighten in the east, the first hints of dawn painting the mountains pink and gold. Back in the barracks, lying on her bunk, Vance's hands were shaking. Not from fear, from the realization that she'd just been made by someone who'd chosen not to expose her. Master Sergeant Wolf knew she was undercover, knew and had let her go. Why 3 miles away, Captain Hartwell would be reviewing the biosensor data, seeing the spike in her stress hormones, running analysis to determine if extraction was necessary. But Vance wasn't in immediate danger. She was compromised, possibly, but not in physical jeopardy. The mission could continue. It had to continue. Because 4 soldiers were dead in Afghanistan, and 43 recruits had been broken at Fort Galloway, and somewhere in the data she'd just stolen, there would be evidence that connected Wade Brennan to both tragedies. All she had to do was survive 10 more weeks without getting caught, without getting hurt badly enough to trigger automatic extraction, and without watching Rachel Sullivan or any of the other recruits get destroyed in the process. Simple, clean, impossible. The math didn't work. Someone was going to pay the price. Vance just hoped it would be her instead of the people she was pretending to protect. Outside, the Morning Bugle started playing, calling Fort Galloway to another day of making soldiers out of civilians. Private Sarah Jensen swung her legs off the bunk, started lacing her boots, preparing to fall into formation with 37 other recruits who thought she was one of them. Major Elena Vance buried herself deeper into the lie, knowing that with every passing day, the distance between who she was and who she was pretending to be was getting harder to measure. The first phase was complete. The infiltration was successful. Now came the hard part. Now came the waiting, the watching, the systematic documentation of every violation while people around her suffered. Now came the part where she had to be strong enough to let bad things happen so that worse things could be prevented. 7 weeks until the punch that would end Wade Brennan's career. 7 weeks of being invisible while the predator circled closer. 7 weeks of wondering which would break first, her cover or her conscience. The data came back dirty. Captain Lucas Hartwell sat in the Tactical Operations Center 3 miles from the main training ground, staring at decrypted files that turned his coffee cold in his hand. The USB drive Vance had pulled from Brennan's computer contained 18 months of digital evidence, and every megabyte of it screamed guilt. Encrypted messaging app communications with known members of the Watchmen of Liberty. Phone records showing 47 calls to a burner number traced back to northern Idaho. Financial transfers totaling $340,000 from an offshore account registered to a shell corporation that didn't quite exist on paper. But the smoking gun, the thing that made Hartwell's jaw clench hard enough to crack molars, was the file dated August 10th, 2 days before 4 National Guard soldiers died in Kunar province. A detailed map of patrol routes, convoy timing, safe house locations, and the names of 3 Afghan informants working with U.S. forces. Everything the Taliban would need to plan a perfect ambush. Brennan had accessed that file from his terminal at 0200 hours, well outside his normal duty schedule. Copied it, and 26 hours later, American soldiers were dead. Hartwell pulled up the live biosensor feed. Major Vance's heart rate was elevated, but stable, currently running the morning physical training circuit with her platoon. The implant was working perfectly, transmitting real-time physiological data that let him monitor her condition from a distance. Right now, she was under stress, but manageable stress. The kind that came from doing push-ups in 100-degree heat, not the kind that came from immediate physical danger. He picked up the secure phone, dialed the number that connected directly to DIA headquarters in Washington. The director answered on the second ring. "We have confirmation," Hartwell said. "Brennan's the leak. Evidence is solid enough for prosecution. Can you tie it directly to the Kunar incident? With what we've got now, plus Vance's testimony about observing him access classified systems outside authorized hours, yes. But sir, there's a complication. Master Sergeant Garrett Wolfe made her last night, caught her in the drill sergeant compound." Silence on the other end. Then, "Is Vance compromised?" "Wolfe let her go, told her to work fast because people are getting hurt. I think he suspects Brennan too might have been why he requested the investigation in the first place. Can we trust him? He's got 47 years of service, spotless record, about to retire. If he wanted to expose her, he already would have." Hartwell checked the biosensor readings again. Vance's cortisol levels were climbing. Physical training was getting intense. "Sir, we could pull her now. We have enough." "Negative. The abuse documentation is incomplete. We need pattern evidence, multiple witnesses, systematic violation testimony. Congressional oversight is breathing down our necks about military training culture. If we're going to burn Brennan for treason, we need to also burn him for what he's been doing to those recruits. 2 birds, 1 stone. That means leaving her in place for another 7 weeks. That's why she's there, Captain. Monitor her closely. If the situation deteriorates, we extract. But until then, the mission continues." The line went dead. Hartwell set the phone down, looked at the screen showing Vance's vitals. Heart rate 130 beats per minute. Blood oxygen good. Core temperature elevated, but not dangerous. She was fine. She was doing her job. 4 dead soldiers in Afghanistan. 43 broken recruits. 7 more weeks of watching Brennan operate while they built an airtight case. The math was cold and clear. Hartwell just hoped Major Vance could hold her cover long enough for the math to work. Because if Brennan figured out who she really was before the evidence was complete, the next biosensor alert wouldn't be elevated stress levels. It would be a flatline. Week 6 brought close quarters combat training and the kind of heat that made the air shimmer like water. Vance stood in formation at 0530, sweat already cutting lines down her face, while Sergeant Brennan explained the day's lesson plan. Hand-to-hand combat, Brennan said, pacing in front of the platoon like a caged animal looking for escape routes. Some of you think war is about rifles and rockets, technology, push-button killing from a distance. But I'm here to tell you that every real soldier at some point in their career will find themselves close enough to the enemy to smell what they had for breakfast. And when that happens, when your rifle jams or your ammunition runs out or you're just too damn close to shoot, you better know how to put a human being on the ground and keep them there. He stopped, surveyed the recruits with eyes that had gone flat and distant. Today, we're going to learn the basics. Striking, grappling, how to disable someone twice your size. But more importantly, you're going to learn how to take a hit, how to get hurt and keep fighting. Because pain is just information, and information can be ignored if you're hard enough. The training mats had been set up in a large open area behind the barracks, thick rubber squares that would theoretically prevent serious injury when bodies hit the ground. Theoretically. Brennan had been doing this long enough to know exactly how much force you could apply before bones started breaking, and he walked that line with the precision of a surgeon who'd decided to become a butcher. He demonstrated techniques on a volunteer first, a big farm kid from Iowa named Anderson, who outweighed Brennan by 40 pounds. Brennan moved with economy and violence, as showing how leverage defeated mass, how striking nerve clusters could drop someone regardless of size. Anderson hit the mat 3 times in under a minute, each impact harder than the last, and when he stood up after the third throw, he was blinking rapidly and listing slightly to the left. "Who's next?" Brennan asked. No one volunteered. Intelligence suggested self-preservation. Brennan's gaze swept the formation, searching for something. Weakness. Fear. The kind of target that made for good examples. His eyes found Rachel Sullivan standing in the second rank, and Vance watched his expression shift into something that might have been pleasure, if pleasure could have sharp edges. "Sullivan," Brennan said, "front and center." Rachel went pale. Vance could see her, swallow hard, fighting down the instinct to run. But she stepped forward, moved to the mat, took the position Brennan indicated. Her hands came up in a defensive stance that was technically correct, but emotionally terrified. Every muscle in her body was locked tight with tension. Brennan circled her slowly. "You're scared. I can smell it. That's good. Fear keeps you alive. But fear also makes you freeze, and freezing gets you killed." He moved closer, invading her space. "I'm going to throw a strike. Your job is to block it." "Ready." Rachel nodded, but her breathing was coming too fast, shallow gasps that suggested she was about 3 seconds from a full panic attack. Brennan threw a slow jab, telegraphed the movement. Rachel flinched backward, instead on a blocking. The strike missed by 2 feet, but she still recoiled like she'd been hit. "Pathetic," Brennan said. Not loud, worse than loud. Quiet and disappointed. "You just let yourself get killed because someone moved fast near your face. What happened? Sullivan Daddy used to smack you around. You bring that weakness into my army, and it's going to get real soldiers hurt." Rachel's eyes filled with tears. She blinked rapidly, fighting to keep them from falling, but her whole body was shaking now. Vance watched from the formation, every instinct screaming to intervene, knowing she couldn't. Not yet. Documentation required letting this play out. Building evidence required witnessing harm. The biosensor under her ribs registered her elevated heart rate, transmitted the spike to Hartwell 3 miles away. He'd be watching now, making calculations about whether this constituted immediate danger or just regular training brutality. Brennan raised his hand again. Rachel flinched again, harder this time, actually stumbling backward. The other recruits watched in uncomfortable silence. This wasn't training anymore. This was targeted psychological warfare designed to break someone who was already cracking. "I volunteer," Vance heard herself say. The words were out before her conscious mind authorized them. "Let me go instead, Sergeant." 37 pairs of eyes turned toward her. Brennan's expression flickered through surprise before settling back into that flat, predatory focus. He studied Vance for a long moment, and she could see him recalibrating, shifting targets, recognizing that something was different about this recruit who kept volunteering to step into harm's way. "Jensen," he said, "you think you're tough enough to handle what Sullivan can't?" "No, Sergeant. I just think I'm expendable enough that breaking me won't matter as much." It was exactly the kind of thing a farm girl with low self-esteem might say. Self-deprecating, harmless. But Vance watched Brennan's eyes narrow slightly, saw the gears turning behind them. He was smart, dangerous, and smart. The worst combination. "All right, farm girl," Brennan said. Sullivan back in formation, Jensen on the mat. Rachel practically ran back to her position, relief and guilt warring across her face. Vance stepped onto the mat, rolled her shoulders, loosened her joints. She'd trained in close quarters combat at DIA, though not extensively. Enough to defend herself. Enough to recognize when someone knew what they were doing. But farm girls from Ohio didn't have tactical training, so she'd have to fake incompetence convincingly, while also protecting herself from real injury. Brennan moved to the center of the mat, gestured for her to approach. Basic defensive stance. Hands up, knees bent, weight distributed evenly. "Show me." Vance took the position, deliberately making it slightly wrong. Too much weight on her heels, hands too low to effectively block strikes to her head. Brennan circled her, correcting her posture with sharp taps from his hand. Each contact was harder than necessary, little jolts of controlled violence. "Better," he said. "Now I'm going to throw some strikes, half speed. Your job is to block or evade. Don't try to counter, don't try to be a hero. Just defense. Understand?" "Yes, Sergeant." Brennan threw the first jab at 60% speed. Fast enough to be realistic, slow enough that blocking it was possible for someone with no training. Vance parried it with her forearm, the impact sending a jolt up to her shoulder. Acceptable. Looked authentic. Second strike came faster, a cross aimed at her ribs. Vance twisted, took it on her upper arm instead of her body. The force of it pushed her back 2 steps, and she had to work to make the stumble look natural instead of like a controlled tactical retreat. "Not bad," Brennan said. "You've got decent reflexes. Let's see how they hold up under pressure." The third strike came at full speed, no warning, a hook aimed at her jaw. Vance's training kicked in before she could stop it. She slipped the punch with a subtle shift of her head, letting it sail past her ear by 2 inches, and in that same motion her body started to counter, hip-rotating knee coming up to drive into his exposed ribs. She caught herself. Aborted the movement mid-execution, turned it into an awkward stumble instead. But for half a heartbeat, maybe less, her real training had shown through. The muscle memory of someone who'd been taught to fight by professionals, not by YouTube videos and self-defense seminars. Brennan's eyes went cold and sharp. He'd seen it. Not the counter itself, but the way she'd moved. Too controlled, too practiced. The kind of economy of motion that took years to develop. "Where'd you learn that?" he asked. His voice had dropped to that dangerous quiet register. "I'll learn what, Sergeant?" Keep the confusion authentic. Farm girl wouldn't know what she'd done wrong. That slip, that footwork. Brennan stepped closer, invading her personal space, using his size to intimidate. "Nobody teaches that in basic self-defense classes. That's professional instruction." Vance felt the biosensor spike against her ribs. 3 miles away, Hartwell would be seeing her stress hormones jump, making calculations about extraction protocols. "I don't know what you mean, Sergeant. I just moved without thinking." "No." Brennan grabbed her wrist, held it up between them. "You moved with precision, efficiency, the way people move when they've been trained to kill." His grip tightened, just short of painful. "So I'm going to ask you one more time, Private Jensen. Where did a farm girl from Ohio learn close quarters combat techniques?" The silence stretched out like razor wire. 37 recruits watching, waiting. The moment balanced on a knife edge, and Vance understood with crystalline clarity that her cover was disintegrating in real time. Brennan suspected. Maybe didn't know for certain, but suspected enough to be dangerous. She could try another lie. Could manufacture some explanation about a self-defense course at community college, a boyfriend who taught her a few moves, something plausible enough to maybe deflect suspicion. Or she could tell a version of the truth that might actually work better. "My father," Vance said quietly. Let her voice shake slightly, like the words were coming from somewhere painful. He was military police stationed in Germany before I was born. He taught me some things before he left. It was close enough to real to feel authentic. Elena Vance's actual father had been a Marine, though he died in a training accident when she was 6. The grief in her voice when she mentioned him wasn't manufactured. Brennan studied her face with the intensity of an interrogator looking for the tells that indicated deception. But grief was harder to fake than most emotions, and Vance let him see it. The loss. The complicated relationship with a military that took her father too early. After a moment that lasted too long, Brennan released her wrist. Military brat, that explained some things. But his voice still carried suspicion, and his eyes hadn't warmed up at all. Get back in formation, Jensen. I'm not done with you. Vance returned to her position, feeling 37 pairs of eyes tracking her movement. Rachel caught her eye, mouthed, "Thank you," silently. Vance gave the smallest nod in response while her mind raced through scenarios. Brennan suspected she wasn't who she claimed to be. He was intelligent enough to be paranoid, experienced enough to trust his instincts. If he started digging into Sarah Jensen's background, if he made phone calls to verify her story, the DIA manufactured identity would hold up to casual inspection, but not to determined investigation. The mission timeline had just accelerated. 7 weeks until the planned confrontation suddenly felt like far too long. She needed to force his hand. Soon. That night after lights out, Vance lay in her bunk and listened to the barracks breathe. 37 other people trying to find sleep in the darkness, their sounds creating a symphony of exhaustion. Snoring shifting the occasional nightmare whimper from someone whose mind wouldn't let them rest. Rachel's bunk was 2 feet away, and Vance could hear her crying again. Soft, suppressed sounds that suggested someone who'd had a lot of practice crying quietly. After 10 minutes of listening to it, Vance couldn't take it anymore. "Rachel," she whispered. "You awake?" The crying stopped. Several seconds of silence. Then, "Yeah. Come here." Rachel slipped out of her bunk, moved to sit on the edge of Vance's mattress. In the darkness, her face was just a pale oval, but Vance could see the tear tracks reflecting what little light came through the barracks windows. "Thank you," Rachel said, "for volunteering. You didn't have to do that." "Yes, I did." Vance sat up, kept her voice low enough that it wouldn't carry to the other bunks. "He was going to hurt you, Rachel. Really hurt you. I couldn't watch that happen." "Why do you care? We barely know each other." "Because you remind me of my sister. Because I watched Emma get destroyed by someone like Brennan, and I did nothing to stop it. Because I'm supposed to be documenting abuse, but I forgot that the people getting abused are real humans with real trauma." "Because it's wrong," Vance said. It was the simplest truth she could offer. What he's doing to you, the way he targets you specifically, that's not training. That's cruelty. Rachel was quiet for a long moment. "My father," she said finally, "he used to hit my mom, not all the time, just when he'd been drinking or when money was tight or when she said something that set him off. And the way Sergeant Brennan moves, the way he gets close and makes you feel trapped, it's the same, exactly the same. I thought joining the Army would be different. I thought I'd be safe here." Vance felt something crack inside her chest. The mission parameters were clear. Document abuse. Gather evidence. Don't get emotionally involved. But those parameters hadn't accounted for sitting in the dark with a 19-year-old girl who'd escaped one predator, only to be delivered to another. "Listen to me, to me," Vance said, and her voice came out harder than she intended. Officer voice, the kind of authority that Private Sarah Jensen shouldn't possess. She softened it quickly. "You're stronger than you think. Brennan picks on you because he can see that strength and he wants to break it. But he can't break you unless you let him. I'm not strong. I'm terrified all the time. Being scared doesn't make you weak. It makes you human." Vance grabbed Rachel's hand, held it tight. 6 more weeks. That's all. 6 weeks and we graduate and we never have to see Sergeant Brennan again. Can you make it 6 weeks? Rachel's hand trembled in hers. "I don't know." "I know, you can, and I'll be right there with you. Whatever he throws at us, we handle it together. All right?" "All right." Rachel's voice was small but steadier. "Sarah, can I ask you something? That move you almost did today, on the mat, that wasn't something your dad taught you for fun. That was real combat training." Vance's stomach dropped. Rachel had seen it too. If a 19-year-old ranch girl from Montana could see through her cover how long before someone else did? I told you. My father. I believe you about your father, Rachel interrupted gently. But I think maybe there's more to it than you're saying, and that's okay. We all got secrets. I just wanted you to know that if you're here for a reason other than basic training, if you're trying to do something about Brennan, I'll help however I can. The offer hung in the air between them, dangerous and tempting. Vance could recruit Rachel as an informal asset, get her testimony, use her observations to strengthen the case. It would be tactically smart. It would also be ethically monstrous. I'm just trying to graduate, Vance lied. Same as you. Rachel nodded slowly, but her expression suggested she didn't quite believe it. Okay, thanks again for today. She slipped back to her own bunk, leaving Vance alone in the darkness, with the weight of too many lies pressing down on her chest. The biosensor under her ribs transmitted steady elevated stress markers to Hartwell's monitoring station. But Vance wasn't in immediate physical danger, so the extraction protocol stayed dormant. She was just a soldier doing her job, gathering evidence, building a case that would eventually bring down a traitor and an abuser. The mission was proceeding according to plan. So why did it feel like everything was falling apart? Week 8 brought the breaking point. Brennan had been escalating his targeting of Rachel incrementally, like a scientist increasing dosage in an experiment. Extra fireguard shifts that destroyed her sleep schedule. Arbitrary uniform inspections, where he found fault with things that were objectively correct. Psychological pressure applied with surgical precision designed to find breaking points and exploit them. On Thursday morning during physical training, Rachel collapsed. They were running the obstacle course, a circuit of walls to climb trenches, to cross rope bridges, to traverse. Rachel had been struggling, her exhaustion obvious in every movement. Vance stayed close, offering quiet encouragement, physically helping when she could without being obvious about it. But on the last obstacle, a 12-foot wall that required upper body strength, most of the recruits barely possessed Rachel's arms, simply gave out. She fell backwards from 6 feet up, landed wrong, and her ankle made a sound like green wood snapping. The screaming brought everything to a halt. Medics were called. Rachel was loaded onto a stretcher, her face gray with pain and shock. As they carried her past, Brennan Vance saw him make a note on his clipboard. Calm, professional. Recording another training injury with the emotional investment of someone documenting inventory. Rachel was gone for 3 hours. When she returned, she had crutches, a walking boot, and orders for light duty until the ankle healed. 6 weeks minimum before she could return to full training, which meant she'd be recycled, sent back to start over with a new platoon, subjected to another 12 weeks of what had already nearly destroyed her. That night, Vance found Rachel in the latrine at 0200 hours. The lights were harsh fluorescent white, making everything look sterile and cold. Rachel sat on the floor in the corner, the crutches beside her, and in her hand was a small folding knife she must have smuggled past in processing somehow. She was looking at her wrists. Vance froze in the doorway, every tactical calculation evaporating in the face of immediate crisis. Rachel, don't. Rachel looked up and her eyes were empty, hollowed out. The expression Vance had seen on combat veterans who'd stopped believing in tomorrow. It doesn't get better, does it? I get recycled, start over 12 more weeks with someone just like him, or maybe even him again. And if I quit, I go back home to my father. There's no way out. Vance moved slowly, careful not to spook her, and sat down on the floor 3 feet away. Close enough to grab the knife if necessary, far enough not to be threatening. There's always a way out. It might not be the way you want, but it exists. Like what? Like graduating. Like getting through this and requesting a transfer to a different base, different unit. Like using the Army to build a life away from your father and away from Brennan. 6 weeks of medical hold, 6 weeks of new training, 12 more weeks total. You can survive 12 weeks. I'm not strong like you. I'm not strong, Rachel. I'm just stubborn. There's a difference. Vance inched closer, held out her hand. Give me the knife. Why do you care? You don't even really know me. Because I failed my sister and I won't fail you. Because every time I look at you, I see Emma, and I need to save you in a way I couldn't save her. Because this mission was supposed to be about justice, but it's become about keeping people alive until justice can arrive. Because you're worth saving, Vance said simply. Even if you don't believe it right now, you are. And 5 years from now, when you're somewhere else living a life that doesn't include abusive men, you're going to be glad you didn't do this. Rachel's hands shook. The knife trembled. For a long moment that stretched out like years, the outcome balanced on the edge of decision. Then Rachel handed the knife over, and when Vance took it, Rachel collapsed forward into her arms, sobbing. Vance held her, let her cry, and triggered the emergency signal on her biosensor. Not the full Omega Red protocol, the medical emergency code. Within minutes, medical personnel would arrive. Rachel would be taken to mental health services. She'd be put on suicide watch and eventually medically discharged for psychological reasons. She'd be safe. She'd be out. She'd be one more name added to the list of recruits that Brennan had broken. As they waited for the medics, Vance made a decision. The mission parameters had just changed. She wasn't waiting 7 more weeks. She wasn't documenting abuse while people died. She was going to force Brennan's hand, trigger the confrontation, and end this now. Even if it meant getting hurt. Even if it meant blowing her cover early. Some things were worth more than perfect evidence. Some things required imperfect action. The next morning, Brennan announced advanced combat readiness drills. Hand-to-hand combat, full intensity, designed to test recruits under maximum stress. He'd be pairing himself against volunteers, demonstrating techniques through live application. Vance knew what was coming. This was his pattern. This was how he hurt people legally, claiming it was training. And normally he picked victims who were already struggling, people who wouldn't fight back effectively. But this time Vance was going to volunteer first. She waited until Brennan finished his explanation, until he asked for the first volunteer, and then her hand shot up before anyone else could move. "Private Jensen," Brennan said, and something flickered across his face. Recognition. He'd been hoping for this. Front and center. Vance stepped onto the mat, felt 36 pairs of eyes on her back. Rachel was gone medevac to mental health services 3 hours ago. The platoon was down to 36 recruits, and every one of them had started to understand that what was happening here wasn't normal training. Some of them knew she was different now. Rachel had talked quietly, carefully. Nothing specific, but enough to plant seeds. Enough that when this moment came, there would be witnesses who'd been primed to understand what they were seeing. Brennan circled her slowly. "You keep volunteering, Jensen. Keep putting yourself between me and other recruits." "Why is that?" "Because I can take it better than they can, Sergeant." "Can you?" He moved closer, invading her space with practiced intimidation. "Or is it because you're hiding something, because you're not who you say you are?" The accusation hung in the air like smoke. Vance kept her expression neutral, farm girl, confused by implications she couldn't understand. "I'm just trying to be a good soldier, Sergeant." "Liar." Brennan's voice dropped to a whisper only she could hear. "I've been looking into you, Jensen. Called your high school. Called the farm in Ohio you supposedly work. And you know what's funny? Everyone's story matches perfectly. Too perfectly. Like it was rehearsed. Like someone very professional built you a background that would pass casual inspection." Vance's heart rate spiked. The biosensor transmitted the jump to Hartwell. He'd be scrambling now, preparing extraction protocols, alerting tactical teams. "I don't know what you mean, Sergeant." "Yes, you do." Brennan grabbed her wrist, twisted it just enough to hurt without leaving marks. "You're military police, or inspector general, or maybe something worse. And you came here to expose me, to ruin me." His grip tightened. "But here's what you didn't count on, whoever you are. I've been expecting someone like you for months. Ever since I started getting monitored. Ever since certain people started asking questions." He released her wrist, stepped back, raised his hands in combat stance. "So let's do this properly. Let's see what you really know, what you're really capable of. And when I hurt you badly enough, when you break character and fight back with that professional training, I can see hiding under your farm girl act will have our answer." Vance understood. This wasn't training. This was an execution disguised as instruction. Brennan was going to force her to reveal herself and then claim she'd been an infiltrator, that he'd discovered and neutralized a threat. Her death or serious injury would be written off as training accident. The math had shifted. The mission was compromised. But extraction would take 6 minutes minimum, and Brennan wasn't going to give her 6 minutes, which meant she had one option left: survive long enough for help to arrive, and pray that the cavalry was already coming. Brennan threw the first punch. The punch came fast and mean telegraphed just enough that blocking it was theoretically possible but weighted with enough force to break ribs if it connected clean. Vance twisted, took it on her shoulder instead of her chest, felt the impact radiate down to her fingertips like electricity. The pain was immediate and clarifying, burning away everything except survival instinct. Brennan didn't pause. He followed with a low kick aimed at her knee, the kind of strike that shattered ligaments and ended careers. Vance shifted her weight, turned her leg so the kick glanced off her shin instead. It still hurt like hell, but bones stayed intact. For now. Not bad, Brennan said, circling. His voice was conversational, almost pleasant, while his eyes stayed flat and cold. But you're still holding back, still trying to maintain that farm girl act. Let's see how long that lasts. He came in harder combination strikes that blurred together. Jab, cross, hook, elbow. Vance blocked what she could, took the rest on her arms and shoulders, sacrificing extremities to protect her core. Each impact sent jolts of pain through her nervous system, and the biosensor under her ribs was probably screaming alerts at Captain Hartwell right now. Heart rate elevated, stress hormones, spiking early signs of physical trauma. 3 miles away, Hartwell would be watching her vitals crash, activating the Omega Red extraction protocol, scrambling tactical teams. But 3 miles might as well be 300. Help was coming, but not fast enough. Brennan threw a straight right that Vance couldn't fully avoid. It caught her jaw at an angle, not the full force, but enough to split her lip and fill her mouth with the copper taste of blood. Her vision sparked with white light, equilibrium wavering. She stumbled backward, caught herself before falling, and in that split second of defensive positioning, her training took over. Her body knew what to do. Muscle memory from hundreds of hours of DIA combat instruction screamed at her to counter, to drive a knee into his solar plexus, to hook his ankle and take him down hard. The movement started automatically, hip rotating weight, shifting forward into an attack that would disable him in under 2 seconds. But Private Sarah Jensen wouldn't know how to do that. Vance forced herself to abort the counter mid-motion, turned it into a clumsy stumble, instead playing the role even as blood dripped from her chin onto the mat. The effort of stopping her own reflexes was harder than any technique, like trying to halt a car by jamming the transmission into reverse at 60 miles per hour. Brennan saw it, not the counter itself, but the way she'd moved. That fraction of a second where professional training had leaked through the disguise like light through a cracked door. There, he said, and now his voice held satisfaction. There it is. You almost had me, didn't you? Almost took my knee out. That's not self-defense class instruction. That's special operations level technique. He advanced on her, backing her toward the edge of the mat where 36 recruits watched in horrified silence. So who are you really, DIA, CIA? Some Pentagon inspector sent to destroy my career. Vance wiped blood from her mouth, bought herself seconds to think. The extraction team would be loading into vehicles now, running equipment checks, calculating fastest routes. 4 minutes out, maybe 5. Could she stall that long, Sergeant? She said, and let her voice crack with fear that wasn't entirely manufactured. I don't understand what you're talking about. You're hurting me. Yeah, Brennan agreed. I am. And I'm going to hurt you a lot worse unless you drop the act and tell me the truth. Because here's what I know. I know someone's been investigating for months. I know classified information about patrol routes leaked, and suddenly I'm the convenient scapegoat. I know that someone very professional has been watching me, documenting me building a case. He grabbed her uniform collar, pulled her close enough that she could smell the coffee on his breath. And I know that farm girls from Ohio don't move the way you move. The biosensor registered her heart rate hitting 160. Critical stress levels. Hartwell would see it, know she was in immediate danger. But immediate danger didn't change physics. 3 miles in Arizona traffic, even with sirens, and priority clearance, took time. I don't know what you want from me, Vance said. The truth. Brennan released her collar, shoved her backward hard enough that she nearly fell. Or I'm going to beat it out of you right here in front of these recruits. And when you finally break, when you finally fight back with that training you're hiding, I'll have 36 witnesses who saw you reveal yourself as an infiltrator. Self-defense becomes justified. Your body gets shipped home with training accident paperwork. Everyone wins except you. He was right. The logic was airtight. If she defended herself properly, used her real training, she'd prove his accusation. If she didn't, he'd hurt her badly enough that the biosensor would eventually trigger automatic extraction, but not before he'd done potentially permanent damage. Vance's mind raced through options, all of them bad. She could try to talk him down, but Brennan was too far gone, too committed to this path. She could try to run, but running would also prove guilt, and he'd catch her in seconds. She could fight back, properly abandon the cover, but that defeated the entire mission. Or she could trust that Master Sergeant Wolf had seen this coming, because Garrett Wolf had let her go that night in the drill sergeant compound. He'd known she was undercover, known why, and chosen not to expose her, which meant he'd been preparing for this moment, which meant he wasn't going to let Brennan destroy evidence that could finally bring down a system he'd been fighting for years. Vance made her choice. She'd buy time. She'd take the beating if necessary, and she'd trust that the cavalry was already closer than Brennan realized. "You're wrong," she said quietly. "I'm just a farm girl trying to serve my country. But if hitting me makes you feel powerful, Sergeant, then go ahead. I won't stop you." It was the worst thing she could have said. Brennan's face twisted with rage, the kind of anger that came from being denied the satisfaction of breaking someone. He reared back, fist cocked for a haymaker that would put her unconscious at minimum, possibly crack her skull depending on where it landed. The punch came forward with everything he had, and before it connected, the sound of high-performance engines pushed beyond safe limits, cut through the morning air like chainsaws through silk. 3 black Chevrolet Suburbans tore across the open training ground, ignoring marked roads and designated paths, kicking up rooster tails of red Arizona dust. They were moving fast, too fast for standard military police response. These were vehicles driven by people who knew that seconds measured in fractions could mean the difference between rescue and body recovery. Brennan's punch faltered mid-swing. His head whipped toward the approaching vehicles, confusion and calculation flickering across his features. The Suburban screamed to a halt in tactical formation around the combat mat, boxing the area in with professional precision that spoke to serious training and serious authority. Doors flew open before the vehicles fully stopped. Men in plain clothes, tactical pants, and polo shirts wearing plate carriers with no unit insignia poured out, carrying short-barreled rifles that definitely weren't standard military issue. They moved with the coordinated economy of operators who'd done hostile extractions in places where governments didn't officially send operators. But what made Brennan's face go pale wasn't the tactical team. It was the woman who stepped out of the lead Suburban wearing an Army service uniform with stars on her shoulders. Lieutenant General Catherine Donovan, base commander of Fort Galloway, looked like she'd aged into authority, naturally the way granite turns into mountains. 58 years old with steel gray hair pulled back in a regulation bun and eyes that had stopped tolerating nonsense around the time most people were learning to walk. She moved with the deliberate pace of someone who'd earned the right to take their time because everyone else would wait. Behind her, moving more slowly but with equal authority, came Master Sergeant Garrett Wolf. His weathered face held an expression Vance couldn't quite read. Not satisfaction, something sadder. Like watching a student fail a test he'd tried very hard to help them pass. Brennan snapped to attention automatically, 30 years of conditioning overriding his confusion. "General, ma'am, we were conducting training exercises." "Be silent, Sergeant." General Donovan's voice didn't rise above conversational volume, but it carried the weight of absolute command. She walked past Brennan like he was a piece of furniture someone had left in the wrong place, moved directly to Vance, assessed her with a glance that took in the split lip, the developing bruises, the blood on the mat. "Major," Donovan said, and the word hit the assembled recruits like a flashbang grenade. "Are you secure?" Vance straightened, felt something fundamental shift in her posture and bearing. The farm girl evaporated. The officer emerged. 29-year-old Major Elena Vance of the Defense Intelligence Agency stood on that mat covered in her own blood and looked Brennan in the eyes for the first time without pretending to be something she wasn't. "I'm secure, General," Vance said. Her voice had changed too, dropped the rural Ohio accent, picked up the crisp diction of someone who'd given briefings in rooms where mistakes cost lives. "But my cover is obviously compromised." Operation Glasshouse is concluded. The silence that followed could have been measured in geological time. 36 recruits stood frozen, their brains trying to process the impossible transformation of Private Sarah Jensen into Major Elena Vance. trying to reconcile the clumsy farm girl who slept in the bunk next to them with the woman now standing at attention addressing a three-star general. Brennan's face cycled through emotions too fast to catalog. Confusion, realization, anger, fear. The final destination was a kind of sick understanding, like watching someone do math and realize the equation equals their own destruction. "Sir," he started, but Master Sergeant Wolf stepped forward, placed a hand on his shoulder with surprising gentleness. "Don't," Wolf said quietly. "It's over, Wade. Accept it with what dignity you have left." Vance turned fully to face Brennan now. The blood on her chin had started to dry, pulling the skin tight. It would scar, probably. A permanent reminder of this moment. "Sergeant First Class Wade Brennan, I am Major Elena Vance, Defense Intelligence Agency. For the past 10 weeks, I have documented systematic training violations conducted under your authority. 14 separate incidents of unauthorized physical discipline, psychological abuse targeting vulnerable recruits, misappropriation of unit resources, harassment and intimidation in violation of military training doctrine." She took a breath, let the next words carry the full weight of what they meant. "But that's not why you're being arrested today. August 10th, 2040 hours, you accessed classified patrol route information from your terminal at the drill sergeant compound. Information detailing convoy movements, safe house locations, and indigenous informant identities in Kunar province, Afghanistan. 26 hours later, 4 National Guard soldiers were killed in a Taliban ambush at coordinates that matched that classified data exactly." Vance pulled a small tablet from her pocket, held it up so Brennan could see the screen. Phone records, encrypted messages, financial transfers, everything Captain Hartwell had decrypted from the data she'd stolen weeks ago. "You've been in contact with members of the Watchmen of Liberty, a domestic extremist organization. You sold classified information that resulted in American deaths. 4 soldiers who trusted their government to protect them died because you decided your ideology mattered more than their lives." Brennan's face had gone from pale to gray. "I didn't. Those people told me the truth. About Michael. About how weak leadership got him killed. Someone had to—" "Your son died in combat," Vance interrupted, and her voice was ice over steel. "That's tragedy. You killed 4 more sons through treason. That's evil. And you don't get to hide behind Michael's memory to justify it." 2 of the plainclothes operators moved forward with zip ties. They weren't gentle, but they weren't brutal either. Professional efficient, binding Brennan's wrist behind his back with practiced speed. The sergeant who'd terrorized recruits for 18 months didn't resist. He just stood there while the plastic ties bit into his skin, looking at the faces surrounding him, like he was trying to understand how he'd arrived at this moment. General Donovan gestured to the tactical team leader. "Transport him to the provost marshal. Full security protocols. He's to speak to no one without counsel present." She turned to face the assembled recruits, swept her gaze across all 36 of them. "What you witnessed here today is classified at the highest levels. You will be debriefed individually, and you will sign non-disclosure agreements. The official story is that Private Sarah Jensen received a medical discharge. That is all you know. That is all you will ever know. Understood?" "Yes, ma'am," 36 voices answered in ragged unison. As the operators loaded Brennan into one of the Suburbans, Vance caught Master Sergeant Wolf's eye. He nodded once, a gesture of acknowledgement between professionals. Then he turned and followed the vehicles as they departed, leaving Vance alone with General Donovan and 36 recruits whose world had just been turned inside out. "Major Vance," Donovan said, "you'll need medical attention and debriefing, and probably about 3 days of uninterrupted sleep. But first, do you want to address your former platoon?" Vance looked at the faces staring back at her. These people who trusted Sarah Jensen, who'd shared their fears and hopes with someone who was lying to them every moment of every day. She could see betrayal in some expressions, confusion in others. A few looked angry. 1 or 2 looked like they might actually understand. "I'm sorry," Vance said. "It was inadequate, but it was true. I know what I did was, there's no way to make it right. You trusted someone who wasn't real. You made friends with a person who was using you to build a case. That's a violation I can't undo." Private Anderson, the big farm kid from Iowa, raised his hand tentatively. "Permission to speak, ma'am." "Granted. Did you mean any of it, the things you said, the help you gave us? Or was it all just part of the job?" Vance thought about Rachel Sullivan, currently in a psychiatric facility working through trauma that might take years to resolve. Thought about the nights spent listening to people cry, offering comfort that came from a real place, even if it was delivered by a fake person. The friendship was real, she said carefully. The job required lies about who I was. But what I felt about you, about all of you, that wasn't manufactured. I wanted you to succeed. I wanted you to be safe. That's why I was here. Rachel, someone asked from the back. Is she going to be okay? She's getting help, real help. And she won't have to face Sergeant Brennan or anyone like him again. That's the best I could do for her. Another recruit, a quiet kid named Martinez, who'd barely spoken the entire 10 weeks, stepped forward. Ma'am, what happens to us now? You finished training, General Donovan answered. New drill sergeant cadre is being assigned as we speak. The abuse stops today. You have my word on that. The recruits were dismissed back to the barracks to await further instruction. As they filed away, Vance could hear them talking in hushed, urgent voices, trying to process what they'd witnessed, trying to reconcile two incompatible versions of reality. Donovan waited until they were out of earshot. You took a risk staying in as long as you did. Brennan was getting close to exposing you. Yes, ma'am, but we needed the evidence. And you got it. Treason charges, training violations, a network of complicit instructors. Your testimony and the digital evidence you gathered will put him away for 25 years minimum. Donovan's expression softened slightly. You did good work, Major, even if it cost you. Vance touched her split lip, felt the dried blood crack under her fingers. What's the count now? Recruits discharged under Brennan's command. 43 documented cases over 18 months. 43 people broken, 4 soldiers dead in Afghanistan, and I watched it happen for 10 weeks while I gathered evidence. Vance's voice stayed level, but something hollow had opened up behind her sternum. Tell me the math works, General. Tell me what I did was worth it. Donovan was quiet for a moment, choosing her words carefully. 400 recruits will cycle through Fort Galloway this year. Next year, 400 more. Without your investigation, they'd all face the culture Brennan created. Now they won't. The math works, Major. It just doesn't feel good. That was the truth of it. The cold, clean truth that didn't account for Rachel's tears or Anderson's confusion or the 43 names on a list of people who trusted the system to protect them and got betrayed instead. Captain Hartwell will meet you at medical, Donovan continued. Get yourself checked out, file your after-action report, then take a week of leave. That's an order. You've earned it. Yes, ma'am. As General Donovan departed, Vance stood alone on the training mat, where she'd almost been beaten unconscious by a man she'd spent 10 weeks pretending not to understand. The Arizona sun was climbing toward noon temperature, pushing past 100 degrees, and the blood on the mat was turning brown in the heat. 10 weeks of lying, 10 weeks of watching people suffer while she documented their pain with clinical precision. 10 weeks of being someone else so completely that she'd almost forgotten who Elena Vance actually was. And now it was over. Mission accomplished. Bad guy caught. System reformed. Justice served. So why did it feel like she'd lost something she couldn't name? 8 weeks later, Fort Leavenworth's military tribunal handed down its verdict in a courtroom that smelled like old wood and older justice. Vance sat in the gallery wearing her dress uniform decorations on her chest, including the new commendation for Operation Glasshouse, and watched Wade Brennan stand to receive his sentence. The charges had been read: treason, espionage resulting in death, assault on a superior officer, conduct unbecoming, conspiracy. The evidence had been presented over 3 days of testimony from Vance, from Hartwell, from technical experts who'd analyzed the encrypted communications. Brennan's defense attorney had tried to claim entrapment, illegal infiltration, violation of his rights. None of it stuck. The evidence was too solid. The deaths in Afghanistan were too real. The military judge was a colonel in his 60s with eyes that had seen too many soldiers fail the standards that they'd sworn to uphold. Sergeant First Class Wade Brennan, this tribunal finds you guilty on all charges. The sentence is as follows: reduction to rank E1, forfeiture of all his pay and allowances, dishonorable discharge from the United States Army, and confinement for 25 years in the United States Disciplinary Barracks. The gavel came down with the finality of a door slamming shut. Brennan stood at attention, face blank, accepting his destruction with the same rigid discipline he'd demanded from thousands of recruits over 23 years. As the MPs moved to take him away, he looked directly at Vance across the courtroom. She met his eyes, didn't look away, didn't give him the satisfaction of seeing guilt or uncertainty. What she'd done was necessary. The math worked. 4 soldiers had justice now. 400 future recruits would be safer. The cost was acceptable. It had to be acceptable. Outside the courtroom, Captain Hartwell waited with a manila folder. Final piece of business, ma'am. Fort Galloway Reform Implementation Report. General Donovan wanted you to see the results. Vance took the folder, scanned the statistics. Training discharge rate down 89%. Retention rate up 47%. 0 abuse complaints in the past 2 months under new drill sergeant cadre. Anonymous survey results showing recruit confidence in leadership had increased from 23% to 81%. The numbers were good. The mission had achieved every objective. There's one more thing, Hartwell said. Personal correspondence. Arrived at your Pentagon office this morning. He handed her a letter. The return address was a psychiatric facility in Colorado. Rachel Sullivan's handwriting on the envelope was shaky but legible. Vance waited until she was alone in her car before opening it. The letter was short, written on lined notebook paper. Major Vance, the doctors say I'm doing better. They put me on medication for PTSD and depression. I'm sleeping now without nightmares most nights. They say I might be ready to try again in 6 months. Not the Army, but college maybe. Something different. I've been thinking a lot about what you did, about the lying. I was angry for a long time, felt used. But my therapist asked me a question. Would I rather have been lied to and saved or told the truth and destroyed? I don't know the answer yet. Maybe there isn't a good answer. But I wanted you to know that I'm alive because you were there. Even if you weren't who I thought you were, you still saved me. Twice. I don't forgive you. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But I understand why you did it. And I think that's enough for now. Rachel Vance read the letter 3 times, then carefully folded it and placed it in her jacket pocket next to her heart. Not forgiveness. Understanding. It was more than she'd expected and less than she'd hoped for, which seemed to define everything about Operation Glasshouse. She drove back to her Pentagon office through late afternoon traffic, thinking about math. 4 dead soldiers, 43 broken recruits, 25 years in prison for Wade Brennan, 89% reduction in abuse cases, Rachel Sullivan alive and getting help. The equation balanced. Objectively, mathematically, the mission was a success. But success tasted like blood and lies and the weight of betrayed trust. 6 months later, Vance received notification that Private First Class Rachel Sullivan had enrolled at the University of Montana majoring in psychology with focus on trauma counseling. The GI Bill was covering tuition. She was maintaining a 3.7 GPA. She'd started volunteering at a women's shelter helping domestic violence survivors. 1 year after Operation Glasshouse concluded, Vance was promoted to lieutenant colonel and assigned to the Pentagon's Training Reform Initiative. Her job was to design and implement new protocols preventing abuse across all military training installations. She traveled to bases nationwide, interviewed thousands of recruits and instructors, wrote policy that would affect hundreds of thousands of future soldiers. The work was important. The work was necessary. The work kept her too busy to think about the cost. 18 months after Brennan's conviction, Vance received a request through official channels. Second and Lieutenant Rachel Sullivan, recently commissioned through ROTC, was applying for a position with DIA Strategic Analysis Division. She listed Lieutenant Colonel Elena Vance as a reference. Vance stared at the request for a long time. Rachel had finished her degree, earned a commission, specifically requested assignment to the organization that had sent someone to lie to her for 10 weeks. It was either the ultimate act of forgiveness or the most sophisticated form of confrontation Vance could imagine. She wrote the recommendation letter. Honest, thorough, highlighting Rachel's resilience and her understanding of operational security from a unique perspective. 2 months later, Second Lieutenant Sullivan was assigned to DIA headquarters, working 3 floors below Vance's office. They didn't speak for the first month, passed each other in hallways with professional nods, nothing more. Vance didn't push. If Rachel needed distance, she'd earned the right to maintain it. Then one day, Vance found a note on her desk, just a time and a location, a coffee shop outside the Pentagon neutral ground. Rachel was already there when Vance arrived wearing her service uniform, coffee untouched on the table in front of her. She'd changed in the 2 years since basic training, looked older, harder around the edges, but there was something in her eyes that suggested the nightmares had receded enough to let her sleep. Lieutenant, Vance said, sitting down across from her. Colonel, Rachel took a breath. I requested this assignment for a reason. I need to understand what you did, not the mission parameters or the operational justification. I've read those reports. I need to understand how you lived with it. The lying, the watching people suffer while you documented everything. How do you carry that? Vance considered several responses before settling on the truth. Not well. I have a therapist I see twice a month. I don't sleep great. I think about the 43 people on Brennan's list and wonder if I could have stopped it sooner. I think about you specifically most nights. Because you failed to protect me. Because I succeeded in saving you, and it still feels like failure. You shouldn't have needed saving. You should have been safe from the start. Vance wrapped her hands around her own coffee cup, needing the warmth. The math works, Rachel. 400 recruits this year didn't face what you faced. That's success by any objective measure. But math doesn't account for trust or trauma or the cost of doing necessary things that feel wrong. Rachel was quiet for a long moment. I joined DIA because I want to do what you did. Go undercover. Stop bad things before they hurt people. Use my experience to make sure fewer people have to go through what I went through. That's not redemption, Vance said gently. That's just transferring your trauma onto new situations. Maybe it's using pain as fuel for purpose. My therapist says that's healthy coping. Rachel finally took a sip of her coffee. I'm not asking your permission. I'm asking for your guidance. You did this job. You survived it. Teach me how. Vance looked at the young woman across from her, 21 years old now, commissioned officer trauma survivor who'd turned her worst experience into motivation for service. It would be easy to say no, to protect Rachel from the moral complexity of intelligence work, to keep her away from situations that required lying to good people to catch bad ones. But Rachel wasn't asking to be protected anymore. She was asking to be armed with knowledge. If I do this, Vance said, if I mentor you through DIA training, you need to understand something. The work doesn't get easier. You don't build calluses against the moral injury. Every operation where you lie to someone who trusts you takes a piece of you, and you never get those pieces back. I know, I'm still here. All right, Vance pulled out her phone, made a note. I'll sponsor your application for advanced intelligence training. But Rachel, if at any point you decide this isn't the path you want, if the cost becomes too high, you walk away. No judgment, no shame. Understood. Understood, ma'am. They finished their coffee talking about training schedules and security clearances and the logistics of transitioning from regular Army to intelligence work. Professional conversation between two officers. But underneath it ran something more complex. Not quite forgiveness, not quite friendship, but perhaps the beginning of understanding. 2 years after Operation Glass House concluded, Elena Vance stood in her Pentagon office reviewing reform metrics from military training installations nationwide. The numbers continued to trend positive. Abuse reports down 73%. Retention rates the highest they'd been in a decade. Recruit confidence in leadership structures showing consistent improvement. Her desk phone rang. Internal line. Colonel Vance, you have a visitor in the lobby. Second Lieutenant Sullivan says she has a situation requiring your guidance. Send her up. Rachel arrived 3 minutes later, knocked once before entering. She'd been with DIA for 8 months now, working through the training pipeline that would eventually qualify her for field operations. Her expression suggested this wasn't a social call. Ma'am, I have a problem. Ethical question regarding an ongoing surveillance operation. Close the door. Sit. Rachel laid out the scenario. A training instructor at Fort Benning suspected of inappropriate relationships with recruits. Not violent like Brennan, but predatory in different ways. DIA wanted someone to go undercover, document the pattern, build the case. They want me to do it, Rachel said, because of my experience, because I understand how predators operate. But ma'am, I don't know if I can lie to people again. I remember what it felt like from the other side. Vance leaned back in her chair, studied the young officer sitting across from her. This was the question every intelligence operative eventually faced. The moment where the moral cost of the work became real and immediate instead of abstract and theoretical. If you do this operation, Vance said, you'll stop one predator, maybe save a dozen potential victims. That's good math. But you'll also lie to people who trust you. You'll document abuse while it's happening instead of stopping it immediately. You'll carry that weight for the rest of your career. So I should refuse. I didn't say that. I said you need to understand the book before you commit. Vance pulled out a file folder, opened it to reveal photographs. Rachel Sullivan at 19, terrified and broken. Rachel Sullivan at 21, commissioned and competent. You survived, Brennan. You turned that trauma into purpose. But using your experience as a weapon means reliving it every time you deploy. Are you strong enough for that? Rachel looked at her own photographs for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was steady. I think about that night in the latrine, when I was holding the knife. You asked if I wanted to survive, and I didn't have an answer. But I'm here now. I survived. And if my survival can prevent someone else from reaching that point, then yes, I'm strong enough. Then you have my support. But Rachel, the moment it becomes too much, the moment the cost exceeds your capacity to carry it, you extract. That's not weakness. That's wisdom. Yes, ma'am. After Rachel left, Vance sat alone in her office and thought about legacy, about the cost of doing necessary things, about 43 names on a list and 4 dead soldiers in Afghanistan, and 1 young woman who'd survived and was now choosing to step back into the fire. The math still worked. The mission had been successful. Fort Galloway was safer. Training culture was improving across the military. Rachel Sullivan was alive and functional and using her experience to protect others. But success still tasted like blood and lies. And Vance understood now that it always would. She pulled out the letter Rachel had sent from the psychiatric facility 2 years ago. I don't forgive you. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But I understand why you did it. Vance had carried those words in her pocket for 24 months, taken them out during difficult moments, used them as a kind of talisman against doubt. Now she carefully placed the letter in a locked drawer in her desk, not throwing it away, but not carrying it anymore either. Because Rachel had moved past needing to withhold forgiveness. She'd moved into something more complex and mature. Partnership, mutual respect between professionals who understood the weight of necessary evils. The scar on Vance's lip where Brennan's fist had split the skin had faded to a thin white line barely visible unless you knew where to look. She touched it, sometimes a habit she'd developed, feeling the slight ridge of tissue that marked the moment her cover had shattered and her real identity had emerged. Some scars reminded you what you'd survived. Some reminded you what you'd prevented. Vance carried this one as both, a memorial to 10 weeks of necessary lies, a testament to the price of justice, a reminder that sometimes the only way to stop predators was to become something that felt uncomfortably close to prey. 3 floors below, Second Lieutenant Rachel Sullivan was preparing for an undercover operation that would require her to lie to people who trust her, to document abuse while it happened, to carry the weight of necessary evils in service of preventing greater harm. The cycle continued, the work went on, the math still worked, and somewhere in Arizona, Fort Galloway was training 400 recruits without breaking them. Because one woman had spent 10 weeks being someone she wasn't, building a case that destroyed a predator and reformed a system. The mission had been successful. Even if success tasted like blood and lies and the weight of trust betrayed in service of trust protected. Elena Vance stood at her Pentagon office window, looking out at the Potomac River cutting through the November afternoon. 3 floors below, Second Lieutenant Rachel Sullivan would be studying intelligence doctrine, preparing for her first undercover assignment. 1,500 miles west, Fort Galloway would be running evening formation, 400 recruits, standing at attention under Arizona stars safe from predators who wore the uniform. Her desk phone buzzed. Internal line. Colonel Vance, you have a call from Fort Benning. Recruit Advocacy Office says it's urgent. Vance picked up. The voice on the other end was young male, terrified. Ma'am, I'm Private Jennings. I'm calling about, I think something's wrong with my drill sergeant. Tell me everything. Vance said, already pulling up travel authorization forms on her screen. Start from the beginning. As the recruit talked, Vance touched the scar on her lip. The thin white line that marked the price of justice. The reminder that some people wore the uniform to protect and some wore it to prey. And the only way to tell the difference was to watch what they did when they thought no one was looking. The math would never be clean. The work would never be finished. There would always be one more Brennan, one more base that needed fixing, one more recruit who needed someone willing to lie for 10 weeks to expose the truth. But 400 soldiers at Fort Galloway slept safely tonight because one woman had been willing to become someone else. Rachel Sullivan was a live commission preparing to do the same work for the next generation. Master Sergeant Wolf's training protocols were spreading across the entire military. The cycle continued. The work went on. And Elena Vance, who'd spent 10 weeks as Sarah Jensen, who'd watched people suffer so she could document their pain, who'd taken a punch meant to break her and used it to break a system. Instead, she picked up her pen and started writing travel orders. Because somewhere right now, another recruit was crying in the dark. Another predator was hunting in uniform. Another master sergeant was watching and wondering if anyone would care. The answer was yes. Someone would care. Someone would come. Someone would lie and document and bleed if necessary to make sure that recruit didn't become another name on a list of people the system failed to protect. Vance finished the travel orders, approved them with her signature, and started packing her go-bag. Fort Benning, another drill sergeant, another broken recruit who needed saving. The scar on her lip caught the fading sunlight as she worked a thin white line that would never fade, marking the price she'd paid and the price she'd pay again. Some prices were worth paying, every single time.